And you know something else that the Romans get accredited for that's really the Egyptians? This is another thing that I feel like people don't know. You know another really popular thing that the Romans, or the Greeks, or whoever, I get the two confused, they're the same thing in my mind. So something that originated in Egypt that people don't know about? The story of Atlantis. And so it's actually really, really weird. Because when you think about the story of Atlantis, it's like, oh, an advanced civilization. At the time, it was advanced. And so that's kind of what's interesting, is I think that we got decently far about 12,000 years ago-ish. And then something happened on the planet that set people back. It didn't totally wipe us out, but it separated the possible land bridge or whatever that made it easier to cross the ocean. It separated the worlds again. And so it's actually really, really interesting, because when I was studying this Atlantis story, it's like, okay, Plato heard it from his teacher, who heard it from a priest in Egypt, right? So the story of Atlantis came from Egypt. And the priest in Egypt said, oh, 9,000 years ago, there was a big earthquake and stuff. And there was this big city that was on this island out there, not too far off the coast. And it's where all, like, the rich people lived, and where all the high-ups, and, like, where all the knowledge was, like, kind of kept. And it was, like, the main, like, technological center of the world. And it totally got destroyed. Like, just in one night, it was just gone. It just sank. And, like, all the shores changed. All the water level rose so much that all the shore, like, certain places were just totally underwater. And it's so funny, because there's Egyptian places that we know are underwater. We're like, oh, so we know for a fact that there were entire towns back then. The Egyptians made these places that are underwater now. We've found lots of places like, oh, this place is underwater. Oh, but it's because the tide shifted, blah, blah, blah. And so yeah, it makes sense that it's underwater. But we still haven't found Atlantis. And so it's funny, because here's where it gets really weird, and where if you have a brain, it kind of just, there's no way, like, to explain this other than this just has to be the truth. So when you think about Atlantis, okay, so that guy said 9,000 years ago this happened, which that was like 3,000 or 4,000 years ago or something. And it's funny, because it adds up to, okay, the story that he's talking about is about 11,000, 12,000 years ago-ish, right? And so think about a primitive people 4,000 years ago, right? Let's pretend they didn't have all this advanced technology. Let's pretend they were just, as we think, just cavemen type people-ish 4,000 years ago, okay? They can't, like, really analyze the earth like we can today. So they would have had no way of knowing what happened 9,000 years ago, other than maybe a story. But so it's so weird, because he says, oh, 9,000 years ago, this story happened, and it was a giant major point that everybody talks about. That's the only reason that I know, is because it was a story that was passed down. And so it's interesting to think that when you do the math, and then you think about, he's telling a story of 11,000-ish years ago, but then when you look up what happened to the planet at that time that they talk about, that exact thing happens when they talk about that. And there's no way that they would have known that. We know that because we can take core samples of the Earth or something, or I don't even know, but we have a scientific way of being able to find out if water levels have changed over time, and when they changed, and when certain places were underwater. And there's a way that we can actually tell with a high degree of accuracy what happened when. And it's so frickin' weird that that guy tells a story. He says, oh, at this time, this specific thing happened. And then nowadays, like just as of 5 minutes ago, now that we have the technology to actually scan the Earth, we realize that geologically, that story lines up. That if there was an island in this one place right here, it would be gone now, for sure. And it would have gone underwater 11,500 years ago, exactly. So it would have been fucking weird if this guy was telling a story, oh, this place got erased, and it was 20,000 years ago. Or if he said some date that didn't line up. But no, he just coincidentally pulled out of his ass the exact fucking time that the Earth actually did go through a major transition. You know what I mean? And then, oh, but it's all hearsay or speculation, though. Because we don't really know if there was an island, or if they were really even called Atlantis. And you're like, bro, it doesn't matter if they were called Atlantis. Like actually, let's stop calling it Atlantis, because every time we say Atlantis, people just get, oh, But no, it's like, okay, so we actually know for sure that water levels have changed and there's places that are underwater, and that this one place in particular, oh, this place that Plato describes, oh, through the Pillars of Hercules, not too far off the coast, you could see this island. Oh, that's funny. If there was an island right there at that time, yeah, it would be gone now. Because the cataclysm that happened at that time changed the water levels enough to where, yeah, that could actually make sense. Oh, but there's no way to know. So it's ridiculous, you know what I mean? It's like, but yeah, I didn't know that they got that story from Egypt. That tripped me out, you know. And from what I've found, the general consensus is, oh, well, that's a weird coincidence. And I'm like, yeah, isn't it a weird coincidence that these people that were super primitive, like, told this old urban legend about this very specific, you know, disaster that happened at this very specific time. And then, yeah, it is kind of serendipitous and coincidental and weird that those stories did line up with actual events. I mean, yeah. I mean, I could see how you think that there's something there because that story lines up with that. But yeah, that must just be a weird coincidence. You're just like, you're like, what? You're like, okay, but let me run you through this again. If this guy was telling a story about, oh, there used to be an island, and then the gods just destroyed it, but he didn't, like, mention water, or he didn't mention, like, an earthquake, or he didn't, you know, it'd be one thing. Or let's say that they told the story and they said, oh, this happened 1,000 years ago, or it happened 10,000 years ago, or it happened 20,000 years ago. Nobody says it happened 9,000 years ago, very specifically, you know what I mean? And it's funny because, and then that, like, specific exact kind of time frame, like, give or take a few hundred years, oh yeah, that is one of the most significant events in our recent human history. Because remember, human beings have been around for like 300,000 years, and even though there was an ice age and all these weird things happened to the planet, we've somehow survived and managed to persevere and stay alive. And oh, humans have been resilient because we're smart and we adapt and figure things out and we invent things when we're weird. And then so if people have been around for 300,000 years, sure, there was an ice age, but other than that, you know, people have seen some shit because, hilariously enough, 11,000 years ago, something major happened to where all the water levels changed and there was earthquakes and there was this whole big thing and the world totally changed and people would have been around to see that and it would have destroyed things and it would have affected people's lives and it would have been a major event that people talked about and it would have been like, you know, and we have evidence that this did happen. And that we have evidence that people did exist at that time and somebody witnessed it. And I'm sure that, yeah, if they ever did tell stories about it, I'm sure that was nothing ever worth telling or whatever. And it's just like, what the fuck? Because, you know what I mean? Like, if you're living back then and that really happens, like, let's say, you know, that today, like, I don't know, let's say that the whole internet is in one building and that building's like on Hawaii and then one day Hawaii just gets like eaten by the ocean and then all of the internet just gets like erased or something. If a major event happened like that set us back, a major event that just kills a lot of people, that totally separates the world in a way and totally destroys things and destroys the knowledge and sets us back and divides us and makes us primitive in a way all over again, it's like, yeah, they're probably going to talk about that. Like, if there was an island that had a big city, and one night you literally watched the whole thing just go into the waves, and you're like, oh my god, that was like millions of people. And all of our libraries, and like, all of our, like, oh my god. I guess it shouldn't have been on an island. But how would we have ever have known that this was even a possibility, that the island would just disappear? So it's like, I could imagine that that's a story that'd be passed down through the decades. Wouldn't you assume? Wouldn't you assume that people probably talk about that? And it's a story that they... Just think about if that did happen. Think about if the story of Atlantis is real, and we don't even know anymore. Like, we've literally gone so far away from it and the truth in our real past that we think of it as a myth. Like, just hypothetically, let's say that it did happen, and that there was like millions of people that died and this whole giant thing and it set the world back and it was a giant disaster that a lot of people witnessed and it was like a whole thing that like emotionally affected all these people and it was a story that was told and it was a story that was kept through thousands of years. Remember, like 10,000 years people have told the story and kept track of it. And just as of like the past few hundred years, oh no, that's a myth. Oh no, that never really probably happened. Because of whatever, enter your excuse here, it makes no sense or whatever. But, oh, I have this agenda, so here's or whatever, you know? So it's like, I think that one of the reasons people don't think that it is a thing is because they always think, oh, Atlantis was a futuristic civilization that had aliens and spaceships, and then it, and then there wasn't anything like that. And you're like, no, dude, it was a fucking island. It was a fucking island with like a library, and it didn't even have like books. Probably it had like fucking scrolls, and it was ancient as fuck. But it was their knowledge, though. You know what I mean? And it was probably a big fucking deal at the time. And I think that it might be disrespectful for us to just think that it's a myth. Wouldn't that be an interesting perspective? For us to just not even acknowledge that that actually happened? How kind of insulting or disrespectful that would be to those people without even knowing it, you know what I mean? I mean, whether, it's not like you sit here and whine about these millions of people that might or might not have existed that died, but I was just saying that, it's something to think about. It's just interesting because they say, if you put all the stories and all the myths and everything together, it's like, oh, Atlantis it's where the gods lived, It's where it was their technological center of the world. It was the main shipping ports of the world. It was the heart of the world. Like, people came in and out all the time. People studied there and went there for knowledge, and all the high-ups were there. And, So just imagine if one day you're, like, looking out and you see, like, this, like, island, and then it just sinks under the waves, and you're just like, oh, my God. Like, that was, like, because, yeah, we think about 9/11, and we're like, oh, thousands of people died. Or, like, we think about, like, any disaster, pretty much, like, where you're just like, oh my God, like, that was so many people. But this would just be like, oh, not only did I just, like, watch a bunch of people just go under the waves, but that was, like, I just watched, like, the president and, like, all the smart people and, like, all of the technological centers. I just watched, like, all of our, like, shipping materials, all of the shit that kind of mattered, like, in a way. Like, imagine watching a disaster like that happen. We were just like, oh my God. It's like watching the Titanic. It's just like slowly going under the waves, and you're just like, oh my God. There's like so much like people and like even animals and like, but then even like furniture and food and like there's so much going to waste right there. But it's funny because this is like, imagine if the Titanic was everybody that was important, because that's why I think that we kind of got blasted back. It might have been a big deal for a few reasons. It could have destroyed like the knowledge center, or like where they keep like going back to the analogy of if our internet got erased. But yeah, it's just like, not only was the allegedly where it's at made it easier to get to the Americas because there's a whole big ocean that's like daunting and scary, but like apparently 11,000 years ago there was like a big landmass right there. So when that went underwater, it made it so that these worlds are kind of separated, but it also got rid of their knowledge, and it also got rid of, I think, a lot of the high up people. I don't know. It's weird to think about that if that's where the gods lived, all of a sudden everybody that knew all these secrets and all these people, like all these gods, all these people that like were sacred, like had all this knowledge. Just imagine that. Just watching all of the important people just like, you're like, oh my God. Like, it would be a major setback, and it would be a major traumatic event for so many reasons. Because just imagine if like, not only like if you knew people that lived there, but if you knew people that lived on the other side, you're like, oh, not only is that land gone, but now I can't even get to the other side now. And we're dumb again. And we actually don't even know how to really make, boats or whatever anymore. Because there went our knowledge, or whatever. I mean, I don't know. It goes back to like, I don't know how to make a cell phone. I don't know how to make like a TV. And I'm sure there's lots of people in the world like me that don't know how to make a TV, that don't know how to make a phone. There's probably only a select amount of people that really know how to make a phone. And other than that, the only way to do that is probably the knowledge that's stored somewhere. Because let's say everybody important in the world died today, like the Google headquarters or the whatever, and the internet got like bombed and destroyed, and all the smart people got assassinated. We'd be blasted back to the Stone Age. Because even though there's people like me that are, smart enough, we can even be really smart. But we're not going to know how to make a phone. We're not going to know how to make a computer at all. Literally at all. Couldn't even tell you where to begin. Straight up. But it doesn't mean that I'm dumb. Maybe it does, but it's just weird to think about. Yeah, we could very easily lose that knowledge. I think about that all the time. When I think about World War III, I often think, oh great, somebody's literally going to blast us back to the Stone Age with their stupidity, and they're not even going to realize it until it's too late. Like, we're just going to like start bombing each other's like, oh, we're not going to nuke America, but we're just going to bomb the Google headquarters. See if that pisses them off. And then we're slowly just going to blow each other's stuff up to where we just all of a sudden, one day we turn around and we realize, oh, all the important people got assassinated. All the fucking important places got destroyed. Oh, all the blah, blah, blah. Oh, all of a sudden it's just the fucking normies and the muggles and the dumb fucks left. And nobody really knows how to really do anything. You know what I mean? You know, do you even know how to build like a house or even, do you even know any simple things anymore? Or were you relying totally on the internet and all your knowledge? Okay, so everybody's just dumb as fuck again? Without the internet, everybody's just, okay, so yeah, we're blasted back to the Stone Age pretty quick, you know what I mean? I think about that. And it's interesting to think that that could have happened already, but, you know, that time it was Mother Nature, and it wasn't people. The second time it happens, we're probably going to do it to ourselves, but... yeah. Anyways, think about that.
The Egyptians may have crossed the ocean via a land bridge, a continent in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. When Plato indicates Atlantis after the columns of Hercules, in other words, after the Strait of Gibraltar, it is very likely that he is right. This large expanse that would surface would be the ridge of the Atlantic. Atlantis would be the Azores. Following an unprecedented earthquake, this part of the ridge would have collapsed. It is this cataclysm, which Plato calls the sinking of Atlantis, which cut the Egyptian Africans in two. Given the trips they made, they may have built buildings here before the upheaval. Research of this bridge should be done at this point of the ridge. This theory may seem far-fetched, but the chemistry, the pi, the meter, the golden number, the royal cubit, and the solar lenses did not cross the ocean on their own. They may have crossed the Atlantic with boats directly. Christopher Columbus made the second trip from the Canary Islands to Guadeloupe in 21 days. Documents speak of it. In less than 20 days, we saw land. It was an island without harbor or ports. Unable to land there, Columbus came to disembark on a neighboring island, which he called Dominica. They followed the trade winds. These are the regular and very powerful winds that cross the ocean from east to west. In fact, the sailors were worried about not being able to head into them on the return. They too had wooden boats and sailboats like those of Columbus. What is certain is that there is no question. The Egyptians crossed the Atlantic with their knowledge stored in their luggage.